Calvin Whitmore had always imagined that peace had a sound. He thought it would be the rustle of trees on a cool evening, or the soft hush of wind brushing against fresh paint on a newly bought house. When he signed the papers for the Suburban two-story at the end of Alderwood Lane, that was what he wanted: quiet stability. A place where the world stopped spinning so fast. The house itself was ordinary, maybe too ordinary. Beige siding, a clean white porch, shutters painted a safe shade of navy. A driveway stretched like a ton of gray concrete leading to the garage, spotless except for a faint crack near the middle. To anyone else, it was perfect. To Calvin, it was the chance to reset his life after years of noise in the city. Duke, his German shepherd, bounded across the freshly trimmed lawn, tail wagging as if even the dog sensed the promise of new beginnings. Calvin watched with a smile. "This is it, boy," he said softly. "Home." But peace has a way of hiding its flaws until it's too late. That first night, when the boxes still sat unopened in the living room, Calvin stretched out on the couch, exhausted from carrying furniture and memories inside. The neighborhood outside was still, almost too still. No passing cars, no barking dogs, not even the occasional sound of laughter spilling from a neighbor's backyard. It was silence painted so thick it pressed against his ears. Then he heard it. At first it was faint, a low vibration that pulsed through the floor, subtle enough to make him think it was his imagination. Duke's ears pricked. The dog lifted his head from his paws and gave a low growl, staring at the window that overlooked the driveway. Calvin sat up, frowning. "What is it, boy?" The vibration faded, replaced by stillness again. He stood at the window and peered outside. The driveway gleamed under the streetlight, unremarkable, lifeless. He shook his head. Probably an old pipe rattling, or maybe the hum of the refrigerator blending with tired nerves. But Duke didn't lie. The shepherd stayed tense, staring, tail stiff as if waiting for something to surface. By morning, Calvin laughed it off. He brewed coffee, opened a box labeled kitchen, and told himself the adjustment period always felt strange. A new house had its quirks: settling wood, air ducts, the occasional draft. Normal things. He repeated the word in his head: normal. Still, Alderwood Lane didn't feel quite right. The neighbors were polite enough, waiting when he drove past, but their smiles never reached their eyes. When he introduced himself to Mrs. Gallagher across the street, she seemed startled, as if she hadn't expected him to move into that house at all. "You're living there now?" she asked, pointing with her gardening gloves still wet with soil. "Yes, ma'am," Calvin said, trying to keep the cheer in his voice. "Just moved in yesterday." She paused, opened her mouth, then closed it again. Finally, she muttered, "Well, welcome." And that was it. That night, the vibration returned. Louder this time. Duke barked sharply, claws scraping against the floor as he pressed his nose to the front door. Calvin's chest tightened. He crouched beside his dog, listening. The sound was coming from beneath the driveway. It wasn't pipes. It wasn't the refrigerator. It was deeper, like machinery hidden under concrete, thumping in slow, deliberate rhythms. For a moment, Calvin could have sworn it almost resembled voices, muffled, distant, impossible. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Calvin exhaled, running a hand through his hair. His rational mind told him it was nothing, a trick of nerves. But another part of him, the part watching Duke's bristling fur, whispered that his dream of peace had already cracked. On Alderwood Lane, silence was never empty. It was waiting. The third night was worse. Calvin lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each sound that rose beneath the driveway. The thumping had grown bolder, louder, like something, or someone, was moving in the earth below. Duke was restless too, pacing near the front door with low growls bubbling in his throat. Calvin finally sat up, frustration overriding exhaustion. "That's it," he muttered, grabbing the flashlight from his nightstand. Duke trotted to his side immediately, ears alert. Together, they stepped out into the cool suburban night. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and wet soil. A street lamp buzzed overhead, flickering just enough to make the shadows shiver across the driveway. Calvin crouched, pressing his palm flat against the concrete. The vibration was there, steady, rhythmic, undeniable. He flicked on the flashlight, scanning the surface. At first glance, nothing was wrong. Just a faint crack near the center, jagged like a scar. But when the beam of light lingered, Calvin noticed something stranger. The edges of the crack looked worn, as if someone, or something, had pried at it before. Duke growled again, pulling Calvin's attention to the hedge at the edge of the yard. The leaves rustled though the air was perfectly still. Calvin froze, shining his light into the green tangle. A figure stood on the sidewalk, half hidden in shadow. An older man, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, a leash in his hand with no dog attached. He didn't wave. Didn't move. Just watched. "Evening," Calvin called, his voice tighter than he intended. The man gave a stiff nod before finally turning away, disappearing down the street without a word. Calvin stood there, heart pounding. Duke barked once, sharp and commanding, as if to remind him they weren't alone. By morning, Calvin tried again to rationalize. New neighborhoods always had quirks. Maybe the guy was just a harmless insomniac taking a walk. Maybe the driveway's strange vibration was construction equipment underground. He even called the utility company, who assured him there were no pipelines or repair projects anywhere near his street. Still, the unease refused to leave. Later that day, while unpacking boxes in the garage, Calvin noticed movement outside. Mrs. Gallagher, the same neighbor who had greeted him so strangely, stood across the street with another resident, whispering. When Calvin lifted a hand to wave, their conversation cut off mid-sentence. Both women turned and hurried inside without a word. "Friendly bunch," Calvin muttered under his breath. That evening, Calvin decided to stay outside after sunset. He brought a lawn chair, sat at the edge of the driveway with Duke curled at his feet, and waited. The night air cooled, cicadas droned, and stars pricked holes in the black sky. For a while, nothing happened. Just stillness. Then, like clockwork, the vibration returned. Duke's head shot up. His ears pinned forward, and a rumble grew in his chest. Calvin gripped the flashlight, staring at the concrete as if expecting it to crack open. The sound was clearer now, less like machinery, more like movement. Scraping, dragging. Almost like shovels against stone. His breath caught. For a moment, he swore he heard voices. Muffled, hurried. Words he couldn't understand, rising through layers of earth and concrete. He leaned forward, straining to listen. And then, just as suddenly as before, the noise stopped. Silence fell, heavy and deliberate. The kind of silence that wasn't natural, but chosen. Calvin sat frozen, every muscle tight, until Duke's low growl reminded him to breathe. He whispered, barely audible even to himself, "What the hell is under my driveway?" By the end of the week, Calvin could no longer pretend the noise was in his imagination. Every night it came, always at the same time, just after midnight. The thumps, the scraping, the hushed, muffled voices beneath the driveway. Each time, Duke reacted first, ears sharp, body stiff, a low growl rippling from his throat. Calvin began to dread the dog's sudden tension, because it always meant the sounds were about to begin. The driveway itself had changed too. The faint crack he had noticed on the first night was no longer faint. It had widened, stretching across the concrete like a vein. Calvin ran his fingers along it one morning, frowning at how the edges felt almost warm. That evening, he decided to confront one of the neighbors. If anyone knew something, it would be them. He found Mr. Lawson, a wiry man in his 60s, watering his lawn 2 houses down. Calvin approached with a polite smile, trying to sound casual. "Hey, can I ask you something?" Lawson nodded, though his eyes didn't quite meet Calvin's. "You've lived here a while, right?" 30 years, Lawson said, shutting off the hose. Calvin hesitated. "Have you ever heard anything strange at night? From under the street? Or the driveways?" The man's face tightened instantly. He glanced toward Calvin's house, then back at him, lowering his voice. "You don't want to be asking questions like that." "What's that supposed to mean?" Calvin pressed. But Lawson only shook his head, muttering something under his breath before retreating into his house without another word. Calvin stood there, dumbfounded. Every instinct screamed that the man knew something, maybe all of them did. That night, determined not to let the unease consume him, Calvin set up his phone on a tripod facing the driveway. If he couldn't convince himself, maybe a recording would. The hours dragged. Midnight came. And like clockwork, the vibration began. Duke growled, pacing back and forth. Calvin sat rigid on the couch, watching the live feed from his phone, heart pounding. The crack in the concrete seemed to tremble, dust rising from its edges as if something below pressed upward. The sound grew louder. Scraping. Clanging. The unmistakable rhythm of tools against stone. And then, clearer than ever before, voices. This time, Calvin could almost make out words. Urgent, hurried, spoken in a language he didn't recognize. He leaned closer to the phone screen, straining. Suddenly, the video feed shook violently. The camera tilted as if something had struck the tripod. Then the screen went black. Calvin bolted outside, Duke at his heels. The driveway was silent again, the vibration gone. But the tripod lay toppled on the grass, the phone face down. When he picked it up, the casing was cracked, as if squeezed by something far stronger than a simple fall could explain. His pulse hammered in his ears. He scanned the street, but it was empty. Every house sat in darkness, blinds drawn tight, no one daring to look outside. For the first time, Calvin felt the weight of isolation. Not just the silence, but the knowledge that everyone else knew and refused to speak. Duke pressed close against his leg, whining softly. Calvin stared at the widening crack in the driveway and whispered, "They're not just noises. Someone's down there." And for the first time, he believed it. Calvin woke to a jolt. Not a sound this time, but movement. The bed had trembled, just slightly, like the faintest echo of an earthquake. Duke barked sharply from the hallway, nails clicking on the hardwood as he rushed toward the front door. Calvin threw on his robe and followed. When he opened the door, the cool dawn air hit him like a slap. He stopped short, eyes locked on the driveway. The crack was no longer a crack. Overnight, it had split wider, jagged edges crumbling away, chunks of concrete scattered like teeth. A dark seam cut across the center, and from it rose a faint mist, curling and dissolving in the morning air. Calvin knelt, cautious, his flashlight trembling as he shined it into the opening. At first, nothing. Just dirt. Then, something metallic glinted deep within, a fragment of rusted steel, buried under layers of soil. "What the hell?" he whispered. Duke whined, backing away with his tail low, ears pinned flat. That was unusual. Duke wasn't scared of anything. Calvin reached in, fingertips brushing the metallic edge. He pulled it free, his hand shaking as he wiped away dirt. It was a shovel blade, broken at the handle. Old. Rusted. The kind of tool that hadn't been used in decades. And it wasn't alone. As Calvin dug further with his hands, he unearthed scraps of wood, splintered and rotted. Nails bent at odd angles. Then, something worse, fabric. A strip of faded blue cloth, stiff with age, torn as if ripped violently. The mist seeping from the crack carried a smell now. Damp, earthy, but tinged with something sour, something that made Calvin's stomach twist. He shoved everything back in, hard hammering, and staggered to his feet. That's when he noticed her. Mrs. Gallagher stood at the edge of her yard, robe tied tightly around her, arms crossed. She wasn't gardening this time. She wasn't even pretending to be casual. She was staring directly at him. "Morning," Calvin called, voice strained. She didn't respond. Not even a nod. Just turned and walked back inside, the door shutting harder than necessary. By mid-morning, Calvin couldn't focus on anything else. He tried unpacking, making coffee, even watching TV, but every thought circled back to the objects buried under his driveway. He couldn't shake the feeling that he disturbed something meant to stay hidden. Finally, he pulled up his laptop and started digging through local records. Property history, old zoning maps, anything he could find. After hours of scrolling, a pattern emerged. The houses on this street had been built quickly, within the same year. Before that, the land was listed as municipal property with no clear designation. One old document mentioned a construction project that was suddenly abandoned, no explanation, no follow-up. Just stopped. And then, nothing. The paper trail vanished. Calvin sat back, rubbing his temples. Whatever had been here before, someone wanted it erased. That night, he didn't bother trying to sleep. He sat by the window, eyes locked on the driveway, waiting. When the noises came, they were louder than ever. The scraping, the dragging, the muffled voices. Only this time, there was something new. A knock. 3 sharp raps against the underside of the driveway, echoing up through the concrete as if whoever, or whatever, was down there knew exactly where he was. Duke barked wildly, teeth bared at the door. Calvin's skin crawled as he whispered into the darkness. They know I'm listening. The next morning, Calvin didn't even try to hide his exhaustion. Dark circles framed his eyes, his coffee sat untouched, and Duke refused to leave his side. The memory of the knock beneath the driveway clung to him like a shadow. 3 precise raps, too deliberate to be mistaken for shifting ground. Someone, or something, had been signaling. By mid-afternoon, the knock had replayed in his mind so many times that he nearly jumped when the doorbell rang. Standing outside were 2 neighbors, Mrs. Gallagher and Mr. Lawson. They didn't smile. They didn't greet him. They simply stood there, as if delivering a message neither of them wanted to say aloud. Calvin cleared his throat. "Can I help you?" Mrs. Gallagher's eyes flicked to the driveway, then back to him. "You need to stop digging." Calvin froze. "Excuse me?" "You know what I mean," she snapped, her voice sharper than he'd ever heard it. "Stay away from that crack. Don't touch it again." Lawson shifted uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the ground. "It's for your own good." Calvin's frustration boiled over. "For my own good? You two clearly know something. What the hell is under my driveway?" Neither answered. Instead, Gallagher leaned closer, lowering her voice until it was almost a hiss. "Some things are buried for a reason. If you want peace, you'll leave it be." And with that, they turned and left, their footsteps quick, almost eager to be away from his house. Calvin stood in the doorway, stunned. His pulse thundered in his ears. They knew. They all knew. That night, he set up a second phone in case one was destroyed again. He wasn't going to be left in the dark. The street outside looked like any other suburb, quiet, orderly, blinds drawn against the night, but to Calvin, it felt like a stage set, hiding something monstrous beneath. Midnight came. The sounds began, more insistent this time. The scraping of metal. The rhythmic clang of tools. And beneath it all, those muffled voices rising in tempo, as if arguing, or chanting. Then, the knock returned. 3 deliberate raps, right beneath where he sat. This time, followed by another, but different. A slower, heavier knock, deeper, as if from something larger striking against the underside of the concrete. The crack shuddered. Dust sifted upward, coating the driveway. A low rumble vibrated through the house, rattling dishes in the cupboards. Duke barked furiously, throwing himself at the front door, hackles raised. Calvin grabbed a flashlight and burst outside, ignoring the cold fear twisting in his gut. He aimed the beam at the crack, and froze. The concrete had shifted. The gap had widened another inch, and in its darkness, Calvin swore he saw movement. Not just mist this time. A shape. Something pale, retreating as the light touched it. His breath caught. His legs trembled. He took a step closer, but a voice cut through the night. Stop! Calvin spun around. Mr. Lawson stood at the edge of his yard, face pale, eyes wide with terror. Don't look at it! Before Calvin could respond, every porch light on the street flicked off at once, plunging the neighborhood into unnatural darkness. The noises from beneath the driveway stopped instantly, leaving only silence thick enough to suffocate. Calvin's flashlight flickered, then died. And in that silence, one final knock rang out, closer, sharper, directly beneath his feet. Calvin didn't sleep. He sat in his chair until dawn, flashlight clutched in his hand, Duke curled tightly at his feet. The single knot beneath him still echoed in his bones. When morning came, he stumbled outside, determined to see the crack in daylight. It was worse. The jagged split stretched wider, spiderwebbing outward like veins across the driveway. Tiny pebbles littered the surface, evidence that the concrete was crumbling from within. Calvin crouched and pressed his ear close. Nothing now, no knocks, no scraping. Just silence. But silence wasn't comforting anymore. Silence meant waiting. He returned inside and dialed city services. Yeah, hi. My driveway is cracking, structurally unsafe. I think there might be something beneath it. The voice on the other end was flat, almost rehearsed. We'll send someone to take a look. But no one came. By mid-afternoon, Calvin was furious. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He fetched a crowbar from the garage and returned to the driveway, Duke pacing nervously beside him. With a grunt, he jammed the bar into the gap and pried loose a chunk of broken concrete. It came away with unsettling ease. Beneath the slab was more than dirt. A hollow space yawned below, no more than a few feet deep. Calvin shined his flashlight and saw the edge of something buried, a wooden beam, weathered and splintered. It looked like the roof of a tunnel? Or a room? His pulse spiked. He widened the hole, tearing away more debris until he could see clearly. There it was, a structure, man-made, hidden just beneath his driveway. Duke growled low, fur bristling. Easy, boy, Calvin whispered. But his own hands were shaking. Just then, a sharp voice broke the air. What do you think you're doing? Calvin jerked upright. Mrs. Gallagher stood at the end of the driveway, her posture rigid, eyes blazing with something between fear and fury. I'm fixing what's mine, Calvin snapped, pointing toward the hollow. You people know what's under here, don't you? Her lips thinned. I warned you. You warned me, but you never explained anything. There's something down there. Her gaze darted to the hole. She stepped forward suddenly, lowering her voice. If you open it, it won't just stay under your house. It'll spread. Calvin froze. Spread? Before she could answer, a slow creaking sound rose from the hollow. Wood groaned. The beam shifted, sagging as if something below had pushed against it. Gallagher's eyes widened. She backed away, muttering under her breath, It's already waking. Hey! Calvin called after her, but she didn't stop. She retreated across her lawn, shutting her door with a forceful slam. Calvin turned back to the hole, heart racing. The flashlight beam quivered in his grip. Below, dust stirred, and faint whispers floated up through the gap, soft, almost pleading, like a chorus of voices calling from beneath the earth. Duke barked furiously, snapping at the opening. Calvin staggered back, crowbar clattering to the ground. His instinct screamed at him to seal the crack, cover it, pretend he never saw what he just saw. But curiosity gnawed harder than fear. Whatever was buried beneath his driveway had been hidden deliberately. By the neighbors. By the city. Maybe even longer. And now, it was trying to come out. Calvin couldn't shake the whispers. They threaded through his mind long after Mrs. Gallagher had vanished, weaving themselves into every thought, every heartbeat. Duke hadn't stopped pacing since, barking at shadows, ears flat against his head. By nightfall, Calvin gave up on restraint. The crowbar, the sledgehammer, the flashlight, he gathered them all. He wasn't going to let fear or his neighbor's cryptic warnings hold him hostage in his own house. Either I find out, he muttered to himself, or I lose my mind. The driveway was cold beneath the moonlight, a pale stage for the chaos about to unfold. Calvin knelt by the crack, braced himself, and swung the sledgehammer down. Concrete split with a dull thud, fragments flying. Again and again, he struck, until the hollow beneath yawned wider. The air that escaped was damp, stale, tinged with something metallic. Duke whimpered but stayed close, loyal even in terror. Finally, the last beam gave way, collapsing inward with a sharp crack. Dust billowed up, choking Calvin as he waved the cloud aside with his sleeve. He coughed, then pointed his flashlight into the newly revealed cavity. A tunnel stretched below, carved in stone, reinforced with rotting wood. And at the end of the beam, just visible in the cone of light, was a door. Not a wooden one, not metal, but stone, etched with strange symbols that twisted and curled like vines, yet gave off the impression of eyes watching him. Calvin's breath caught. The whispers grew louder, no longer faint. They poured upward, urgent and layered, dozens of voices overlapping. Some begged. Some warned. Some laughed. He lowered himself carefully into the hollow, boots crunching against the dirt floor. Duke whined at the edge, refusing to follow. The tunnel walls pressed close, damp to the touch. Every step forward echoed like a drumbeat. He reached the door, running his hand across the carvings. Cold. Slick. The stone seemed to pulse faintly beneath his fingers, as though alive. Then, 3 knocks. Not from above. Not from behind. From the other side of the stone door. Calvin stumbled back, heart slamming against his ribs. His flashlight flickered as the voices surged, louder now, forming words he almost recognized. Open, open, open. His rational mind screamed to leave, to seal the hole, to forget this place existed. But another part of him, darker, hungrier, needed to know. With trembling hands, he pressed against the stone door. It resisted at first, then shifted slightly, dust sifting from its edges. The whispers rose to a deafening pitch, swirling inside his skull, making it impossible to think. Just a little more, he grunted, pushing harder. The slab scraped open an inch. Then 2. A blast of cold air roared out, carrying the stench of earth, iron, and something ancient. Calvin gagged, shielding his nose. The voices spilled free, no longer whispers but a chorus, greeting him, warning him, luring him deeper. And in the sliver of darkness beyond the door, a pair of pale, skeletal hands curled around the edge, pulling. Calvin staggered back, flashlight trembling in his grip. For one terrible second, his beam landed on a face, gaunt, hollow-eyed, skin stretched thin like parchment. The figure hissed, retreating into the blackness as if the light burned it. The stone door slammed shut with a thunderous crack that shook the tunnel walls. Dust cascaded around him. Calvin scrambled up the tunnel, clawing at the opening until he burst out onto the driveway, gasping for air. Duke barked wildly, circling him, tail between his legs. Behind him, from the tunnel below, came a sound he would never forget. Knocking. Not 3 times this time. Not a warning. Endless. Relentless. As if hundreds of fists pounded the stone door at once. Calvin hadn't slept a second. He sat at his kitchen table with a half-empty bottle of whiskey, flashlight pointed toward the boarded hole in his driveway. Duke lay at his feet, restless, ears twitching at every thud beneath the concrete. The knocking hadn't stopped. Sometimes it softened, fading into muffled thumps. Sometimes it surged in a frenzy, as though the very earth were alive and desperate to break free. By dawn, Calvin's nerves were shredded. He staggered outside for air, eyes red, body shaking. That's when he saw them. Every neighbor on the street stood waiting. Mrs. Gallagher at the front. The tall man with the shovel. The woman with the pale scarf. A dozen others, silent, their faces drawn tight with exhaustion, like people who hadn't slept in years. Calvin froze on his porch. What the hell is this? Gallagher's voice carried, steady and cold. You opened it. His jaw clenched. I didn't open anything. I barely cracked the door. But you knew it was down there all along. Didn't you? The neighbors exchanged glances. Some looked away. Some tightened their grips on lanterns, shovels, even old rusted chains. They hadn't come empty-handed. Gallagher stepped closer. For 30 years, we've kept it contained. Patched the cracks. Poured concrete. Drowned out the noise. But now, she gestured toward his driveway. You've weakened the seal. Calvin laughed bitterly, the sound bordering on madness. You all moved in here knowing there's a pit of monsters under the street? And you just, what, pretend it's normal? It was the only way to survive, the scarfed woman whispered. You don't fight it. You contain it. You live with it. And what exactly is it? Calvin snapped. What's behind that door? The tall man with the shovel spat into the dirt. Not something you can put into words. It's older than this town. Older than the soil. A hunger. A memory. A curse. Gallagher's eyes locked on his. And thanks to you, it's stirring. Calvin's anger flared. No. Don't pin this on me. I didn't build a neighborhood on top of a nightmare. I didn't make some secret pact to keep it hidden. You all did. And you expect me to just sit back and do the same? Gallagher's voice cracked with sudden venom. Yes. Because the alternative is far worse. A low groan rumbled beneath the street, making the pavement tremble under their feet. Duke barked wildly, hackles raised. The neighbors didn't even flinch. They'd felt it before. Gallagher pointed at Calvin, her hand shaking. You've put us all in danger. If it breaches, the street goes first. Then the town. And it won't stop there. Calvin's fists tightened at his sides. Then maybe it's time someone actually faced it instead of hiding. You've all been patching holes and hoping it stays quiet. Well, it didn't. The scarfed woman's voice was a broken whisper. You don't face it. You don't defeat it. You only survive by feeding it just enough to keep it still. The words sent a chill crawling up Calvin's spine. He stared at her. Feeding it? The neighbor's silence was answer enough. Calvin took a step back toward his porch, pulse hammering. You people, you've been sacrificing to it. Gallagher's eyes flickered, just for a second. Regret. Shame. But then the mask returned. We do what we must. And now, so will you. The group began advancing, slow and deliberate, their shadows stretching long in the morning sun. Behind them, from beneath the earth, came a new sound. Not knocking. Not groaning. A laugh. Low, guttural, and impossibly human. Calvin slammed his door shut, bolting it as Duke barked frantically. The neighbors' footsteps pressed closer, their shadows flickering across the blinds. He could hear Gallagher's voice outside, calm and commanding. Open the door, Calvin. It's time you understood. He backed away, heart thundering. Stay away from me, he muttered. You're all insane. The knocking from beneath the driveway had grown stronger, synchronized now, like a heartbeat rising from the ground. The laugh still echoed in Calvin's mind, twisting around his thoughts until he felt dizzy. A heavy thud shook his door. They were trying to force their way in. Duke snarled, teeth bared. Calvin grabbed the crowbar, his only weapon, and planted himself in the hall. But before the door could splinter, the noise stopped. Silence stretched, heavy and expectant. Then, 3 slow, deliberate knocks, not on the door, but beneath the floorboards. The house itself trembled. The neighbors backed away from the porch, as if waiting for something. Gallagher called out again. It's chosen you, Calvin. The rest of us kept it sated, but you've opened the way. Now you'll feed it, or it will feed on you. His grip tightened on the crowbar. I'm not part of this sick game. The scarfed woman's voice carried over the still morning air. It's not a game. It's balance. Without an offering, it breaks free. And if it breaks free, we all burn. Calvin's stomach twisted. He remembered the hands clawing at the stone door, the face shrinking from his flashlight beam. Not human. Not anymore. But the hunger in its eyes had been unmistakable. Gallagher stepped forward, holding something in her hands. A bundle wrapped in black cloth, moving ever so slightly. Calvin's blood ran cold. What is that? Her face was stone. An offering. It should have been last month's, but we held off. We thought the cracks were holding. We thought we had more time. You forced our hand. She extended the bundle. A faint cry escaped the cloth. Calvin staggered back, bile rising in his throat. A child? The neighbors lowered their heads. None denied it. Gallagher's eyes burned into his. It's the only way. You will take it down. You will finish what you started. Or it takes you instead. The ground rumbled again, a shudder that rattled the glass in the windows. Duke whined, pressing against Calvin's leg. He could feel it too, the hunger waiting just beneath the soil, eager, expectant. Calvin's thoughts raced. He could run, but where? The neighbors had blocked the street with their cars. He could fight, but against all of them? Against it? And the worst thought of all, what if they were right? What if sacrificing one kept thousands alive? Gallagher moved closer to the steps. Decide quickly, Calvin. It grows restless. The bundle squirmed in her arms, another faint cry piercing the air. Calvin's knuckles whitened on the crowbar. He wanted to scream, to deny this nightmare, to burn it all down. But beneath his rage, another voice whispered, the same one that had lured him into the tunnel. Open, feed, survive. The neighbors waited, eyes cold, resigned. They had done this before. They would do it again. And now, they were passing the burden on to him. Calvin's breath shook. He was standing at the edge of a decision that could damn him either way. Above, the morning sun broke through the clouds, spilling light across the street. But beneath the driveway, the knocking returned, louder, faster, insistent. It wanted its offering. And it wanted it now. The bundle trembled in Gallagher's hands, the faint cry echoing through the still morning air. The neighbors stood in a silent semicircle, eyes fixed on Calvin, waiting for him to decide. The knocking beneath the driveway quickened into a frenzied rhythm, shaking the ground so hard that cracks began to spread across the asphalt. The earth wasn't just hungry, it was impatient. Calvin's pulse thundered in his ears. He raised the crowbar, his voice hoarse. You're all monsters. Gallagher didn't flinch. No. We're survivors. And if you want to live, you'll become one too. Duke growled, hackles raised, teeth bared. The dog's loyalty was the only thing keeping Calvin grounded, keeping him from giving in to the terror pressing down on him. The neighbors closed in, their faces masks of grim acceptance. None of them liked this, but all of them had chosen it long ago. Calvin's gaze darted between the bundle, the crowbar, and the widening cracks beneath the street. He saw flashes in his mind, the face behind the stone door, the pale, grasping hands, the laugh that had followed him into his dreams. Feed, or be fed. His chest tightened. No, he whispered, shaking his head. Not like this. Gallagher's eyes narrowed. Then it will take you instead. The ground split open with a deafening crack. Asphalt shattered, spraying chunks across the lawn. From the fissure rose a sound no human throat could produce, part growl, part howl, part shriek of endless hunger. A shadow shifted beneath the surface, vast and writhing. The neighbors didn't scream. They didn't run. They simply turned toward Calvin as if presenting him their newest offering. Adrenaline surged. Calvin swung the crowbar, smashing it against Gallagher's lantern. Glass exploded, flame leapt into the air. Startled cries erupted from the circle. Duke lunged, teeth sinking into the tall man's arm, dragging him down. Chaos. Calvin seized the bundle from Gallagher's arms. She screamed, clawing at him, but he shoved her aside with a strength born of desperation. The bundle was lighter than he expected, lighter than a child. Hard hammering, he tore back the black cloth. Not a baby. A doll. An old, wooden thing, carved crudely, smeared with what looked like dried blood. Its hollow eyes stared back at him. He felt sick. What the hell is this? Gallagher's face twisted. It doesn't matter what form the offering takes. Only that it believes. That you believe. The earth roared, a cavernous sound that shook the bones in Calvin's body. The cracks widened, reaching his feet. The choice was upon him. Offer the doll. Give in. Continue the cycle. Or defy it, and risk unleashing something the world could never contain. Calvin's breath came ragged. He looked at Duke, at the only creature that had stood by him through this nightmare. He thought of the town, the people sleeping, oblivious. He thought of himself, broken but unbowed. No, he snarled. I won't feed your monster. With all his strength, Calvin hurled the doll into the widening fissure. Then he grabbed a fallen lantern, flames licking at the glass, and smashed it down into the crack. Fire spilled into the earth. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the street convulsed. A scream erupted from the depths, a sound so powerful it rattled windows and burst eardrums. The neighbors collapsed, clutching their heads, shrieking. Calvin stood firm, crowbar raised, Duke snarling at his side as fire roared through the fissure. The shadow writhed below, racked with fury. But it wasn't rising, it was retreating, pulled back by the blaze. The fissure began to close, asphalt groaning as if the earth itself was stitching the wound shut. Gallagher stared at him, horror in her eyes. You fool. You think you've beaten it? You've only enraged it. It will come again. And next time, it won't stop at the street. Calvin stepped forward, face grim, voice steady. Then I'll be waiting. The last of the cracks sealed shut. The knocking stopped. The neighbors lay scattered, broken by their own faith, their pact undone. Calvin stood over them, chest heaving, sweat dripping down his brow. Duke licked his hand, trembling but alive. For the first time, the street was silent. But in the silence, Calvin knew one thing with bone-deep certainty. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning.